Hey friends, it's your teen and tween librarian, and I'm back for another episode of Bedtime Stories. Last episode, we saw Axel at a dead end in a cave somewhere in complete darkness, badly hurt, covered in blood, and pretty much wishing for death, which is pretty depressing. Until he starts to hear noises, which he calls thunderous, until we find out later they were gunshots from his uncle and Hans, and then voices. And finally, he gets to talk to his uncle through an amazing effect, often called a whispering wall, or as I found when I did a little research, a parabolic effect. Essentially, very layman's term, because I'm not a science person, that the walls serve as a sort of series of mirrors that reflect the sound. If you took a bunch of mirrors and set them up just so and shined a light at them, the light would bounce back and forth all the way to the other end. And that's basically the similar situation that's going here for the sound, except that in this case, sound is bouncing along the walls in a much slower rate too. But it works. There's a lot of examples. They mentioned a couple in the book. The ear of I can never pronounce this god's name. Dionysius? It's one of those, you read it, you know who he is, but how do you say it? Dionysius, I'm going to say. The ear of Dionysius in Sicily. St. Paul's Cathedral in London. I believe even there's a spot in New York, Grand Central Station, perhaps? And then there's also a couple other places like the Echo Wall and the Temple of Heaven in Beijing, where they have this similar effect where you can stand on one side, say a word, and somebody on the other side can hear what you're saying, even if you're just whispering. They would have to be, because it's a perfect circle hemisphere that kind of aids this. But in the cases of the ear of Dionysius, that is an irregular shaped cavern, and somehow yet the sound still bounces and you get that whispering wall effect, even though it's not a perfect circle and it's not proportioned exactly. It's just the way those sound mirrors were set up. Anyway, I'm very excited to get into chapter 29 to find out what happens to poor Axel and to see if their expedition is over or is there more for them to discover. Let's get into it. Enjoy. Chapter 29. Saved. It's a good sign, right? When I came to, I was in semi-darkness, stretched out on some thick rugs. My uncle was watching my face for some sign of life. At my first sigh, he took my hand, and when I opened my eyes, he gave a cry of joy. "He's alive! He's alive!" he cried. "Yes," I answered feebly. "My dear boy," said my uncle, clasping me in his arms, "you are saved." I was deeply touched by the affectionate tone in which he uttered these words, and even more by the gesture which accompanied them. But it required an occasion such as this to bring out the professor's real tenderness. At that moment, Hans came up, and I think I may safely say that there was joy in his eyes when he saw my uncle holding my hand. "Gott dog," he said. "Good day, Hans." "Good day," I murmured. "And now, uncle, tell me where we are." "Tomorrow, Axel, tomorrow. Just now you are too weak. I've bandaged your head with the compresses, which must not be disturbed. So sleep now, and tomorrow I will tell you everything." "But at least tell me what time it is and what day." "It's 11 o'clock at night, and today is Sunday, the 9th of August. I forbid you to ask me any more questions until the 10th. I was indeed very weak, and my eyes shut of their own accord. I needed a good night's rest, and I therefore let myself drop off to sleep, with the thought that I had been alone for 3 days. The next morning, on awakening, I looked round me. My bed, made up of all our traveling rugs, was installed in a delightful grotto, adorned with magnificent stalagmites and carpeted with fine sand. It was half light. There was no torch or lamp burning, yet certain inexplicable gleams of light were filtering in through a narrow opening in the grotto. I could also hear a vague, mysterious murmur, something like the sound of waves breaking on a shore, and now and then a noise like the whistling of wind. I wondered whether I was really awake, whether I was dreaming, whether my brain had been cracked in my fall and I was hearing purely imaginary noises. But neither my eyes nor my ears could be deceived to this extent. That really is a ray of daylight, I thought, slipping in through that cleft in the rocks. That really is the murmur of waves and the whistling of the wind. Am I utterly mistaken, or have we returned to the surface of the earth? Has my uncle given up the expedition or brought it to a successful conclusion? I was asking myself these unanswerable questions when the professor appeared. "Good morning, Axel," he said gaily. "I'm ready to wager that you are feeling better." "I am indeed," I said, sitting up on the rugs. "That isn't surprising, because you have slept well. Hans and I took turns in watching over you, and we could see you visibly recovering." "I certainly feel in fine shape, and I'm ready to prove it by making short work of anything you give me in the way of breakfast." "Oh, you shall have something to eat, my boy. The fever has left you. Hans rubbed your wounds with some secret Icelandic ointment, and they have healed up wonderfully. He really is a splendid fellow." While he was talking, my uncle prepared some food for me, which I wolfed down, in spite of his advice to eat slowly. Meanwhile, I plied him with questions which he answered straight away. I then learnt that my providential fall had brought me to the end of an almost perpendicular shaft, and as I had landed in the midst of a torrent of stones, the smallest of which would have been enough to kill me, it looked as if a loose portion of the rock had come down with me. This frightening vehicle had carried me, bleeding and unconscious, right into my uncle's arms. "It really is a miracle," he told me, "that you weren't killed 100 times over. For heaven's sake, don't let us get separated again, or we might be parted for good." Not get separated again? Then the expedition wasn't over? I opened my eyes wide in astonishment, and this immediately brought the question. "What's the matter, Axel?" "I want to ask you something. You say that I'm safe and sound?" "Yes." "And none of my limbs are broken?" "Not a single one." "And my head?" "Apart from a few bruises, your head is perfectly all right and set firmly on your shoulders." "Well, I'm afraid that my brain is affected." "Your brain affected?" "Yes. We haven't returned to the surface, have we?" "No, certainly not." "Then I must be mad, because I can see daylight, and I can hear the wind blowing and the sea breaking on the shore." "Oh, is that all?" "Won't you explain?" "I can't explain anything, because it's inexplicable. But you shall see for yourself, and then you'll realize that geologists still have a lot to learn." "Then let's go out," I cried, sitting up. "No, Axel, the open air might be bad for you." "The open air?" "Yes, the wind is rather strong. I don't want you to risk going out in it." "But I tell you, I feel perfectly well." "Have a little patience, my boy. A relapse would cause us a lot of trouble, and we have no time to lose, for the voyage may be a long one." "The voyage?" "Yes, rest today, and tomorrow we set sail." "Set sail?" I sat up with a start. Set sail? Did that mean there was a river, a lake, or a sea outside? Was there a ship waiting for us, anchored in some underground harbor? My curiosity was aroused to fever pitch, and my uncle tried in vain to restrain me. When he saw that my impatience was likely to do me more harm than the satisfaction of my curiosity, he gave way. I dressed quickly. As an extra precaution, I wrapped one of the rugs around me, and then I left the grotto. And that's the end of chapter 29.